All right, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're going to talk about agencies and courts. This is going to build off of our last lecture, which had addressed the topic of legislators. Now, legislators, while they are considered lawmakers, they usually only deal with lawmaking in a very general way. Most of the rules and regulations that you and I follow on an everyday basis don't come from legislators, but rather they come from agencies, executive agencies. Now, we're going to address agencies and courts in this lecture. I'm just going to sneak in courts, a brief thing about courts at the very end. And the reason being is because we're going to spend the vast majority of this course talking about the court system in the United States. So, what you're looking at here, you see this round table. Seems like it's got a lot of very important individuals surrounding it. You might notice Barack Obama over here. He appears to be leading this session with these other individuals. Do you happen to know what this meeting is called? I'm going to give you a second to think about it. It might help you to know that this right here was the old Secretary of State. His name was John Kerry. Over here, you have the old Attorney General, Eric Holder. So this would be what is known as the President's Cabinet meeting. So a cabinet, and that comes with a capital C as opposed to a lowercase c. What this is it's all of the President's most important advisors surround him, and they all discuss a central issue. So if there's a topic, let's say there was a terrorist attack that happens in the United States. Well, then all of the president's most important advisors show up to this meeting. You would have the Secretary of the Department of Transportation, the Department of Defense, the Department of Education, the Department of this, the Department of that, and all of the heads of all of these different executive agencies would surround the presidents at this table, and they would all discuss how to address this central issue from multiple viewpoints. So this is going to come into play later on with the assignment that I'm going to give you at the end of class today. So I want you to just keep this meeting in mind. So where do laws come from? Agencies. As I mentioned, legislative bodies like Congress or the Illinois General Assembly, they usually only deal with problems in a very general or non-specific way. So you might have a legislator would pass a law that guarantees safe working conditions in places of employment, which, I mean, that's a great thing. We should have safe working conditions in places of employment. The issue is what does that actually mean? That's very, very vague, and what is safe working conditions in one career path is completely different than safe working conditions in another career path. For example, in my dad's company, my dad drives a cement truck. He is obligated to wear a hard hat to work. He also has to wear steel-toed boots to work every single day, and I, however, don't need to do that. As a teacher, I don't need to wear a hard hat or steel-toed boots. So safe working conditions is going to differ from place to place. Now, most of the laws that affect you are made by government agencies. And these agencies create much more specific rules and regulations. Now, the interesting thing is that these rules and regulations that are created by these agencies actually do carry the force of law. And one of the criticisms of executive agencies sometimes is that they are, in fact, hidden lawmakers. And the fact that they create these rules and regulations that have the force of law. However, nobody ever elected these people. So to give you an example of an executive agency, you have the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, otherwise known as OSHA. So the Occupational Safety and Health Administration creates regulations such as the standard height of guardrails in factories, the number of fire exits that are required, the type of safety equipment to be worn in different professions. So OSHA was created in response to this law that the U.S. Congress had passed guaranteeing safe working conditions in places of employment. Congress passes this law, then creates an executive agency to implement that law, to enforce that law. So I don't want you to ever think that the legislative branch's job is to enforce law. It's not. The legislative branch of this country creates law. Their job is to make legislation, but it is the executive branch. Their role is to enforce law. The executive branch of this country, you're talking the president, the vice presidents, and all of the executive agencies that fall under their scope. So to give you a few more examples so that you can really wrap your head around this idea of what an executive agency is. You have the National Environmental Policy Act of 1969, was passed by Congress. But once again, this was very, very vague. To declare national policy which will encourage productive and enjoyable harmony between man and his environment, to promote efforts which will prevent or eliminate damage to the environment, and yada, yada, yada. You get the point. Very, very vague. What does that actually mean? The words are essentially meaningless if there are not rules and regulations that are developed to enforce the spirit of this law. So, the National Environmental Policy Act had prompted Congress to create a brand new executive agency. And this new executive agency is known as the Environmental Protection Agency. I say it's new, but it's been around since 1970. You might have already had some run-ins with the Environmental Protection Agency because you have the EPA does things like set specific limits on pollution, which probably wouldn't affect you too much, but sets drinking water standards. That's going to affect you every single day. The fact that you are guaranteed clean drinking water, that's the EPA's doing. They set vehicle emissions testing requirements. So I don't know how many of you own a car, but when you do eventually own your own car, you're going to have to go to a vehicle emissions testing center. And this testing center, which falls under the purview of the EPA, conducts a scan of your car to determine the levels of pollution that your car is currently emitting. So if you pass, you're good for another 2 years. But if you fail, like my last car did, then you have to go see a mechanic to get your car fixed. Or if there's no fix in your car, as was the case with my 1997 Mercury Cougar, the old grandpa car, you have to throw it out. You have to get rid of it and buy a new car because you're polluting the environment too much. Next, we have in 2002, the Department of Homeland Security was created. And this was a department that was created in response to the 9/11 attacks that had taken place. So what is the Department of Homeland Security's goal, their mission? Well, it is to prevent and respond to terrorist attacks on U.S. soil. In response to the 2008 financial collapse, the so-called beginning of the Great Recession, the Consumer Financial Board was created, and with the mission to prevent credit card companies from raising interest rates on existing credit card balances. So some other examples of government agencies. You have the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Transportation, Department of Education, the Census Bureau, Social Security Administration. Many of these agencies are creating rules and regulations that you and I have to abide by. The agencies, though, that have the greatest impact on your life are those at the state and local levels. So, for example, you have zoning commissions. Every town has a zoning commission which decides what buildings can be built where. Have you ever considered why you don't have a house that is located right next to a Walmart which is located right next to an apartment building, and then you have a movie theater next to a house, and rather you have zoning commissions decide what areas of the town are going to be residential areas and what areas of your town are commercial areas, areas that are reserved for commerce or trade, for business. Local agencies will sometimes hold public hearings to decide if new restaurants can sell alcohol or host live music. I know over at Bartlett High School, when I used to work there, I had a student that was complaining to me that there was a new wedding venue that had opened up right behind her house, and this wedding venue was blasting music deep into the night, 1 a.m., 2 a.m., and her family had complained to a local agency, which would be probably the city council, and the city council had established a new rule stating that at midnight, this wedding venue had to shut the music off. I know that I went to Downers Grove Fest. I shouldn't say went to. I frequently go to Downers Grove Fest over every summer. And at Downers Grove Fest, you always say the band is playing and everybody's having a good time, dancing, and then abruptly at midnight, the band says, "All right, thank you everybody for coming," and then they walk off stage. Well, if you've ever been to a concert before, you know that the crowd starts yelling encore, encore, encore. But what's strange is that the band never comes back out. And the reason being is because there is a local ordinance that establishes that they cannot play music past a certain time. The School Board of Education is another example of a government agency. School board members are elected officials. The community votes on who gets to sit on the District U46 school board. And the District U46 school board decides how to spend millions of dollars in renovations to schools. They make curriculum decisions. They make very important decisions about your education. So administrative agencies are, in effect, as I mentioned before, hidden lawmakers. It's regulations issued by these agencies become law, and people don't often get the chance to vote on those rules and regulations. Public hearings are sometimes available to people that may be affected by these rules and regulations, and it gives individuals and businesses opportunities to express their views. You see a public hearing going on right here, where you may have a city council meeting, and each person is allotted a certain amount of time to speak on a given issue. At District U46 school board meetings, it's the same thing, where people from the community can go to a school board meeting and there's a specific time reserved for public comments in which you can share your views about issues regarding U46 education with the school board members that are supposed to be representing you. So there's arguments for and against these administrative or executive agency rules and regulations. Those that are in favor of rules and regulations, they make the argument that administrative regulations give meaning to laws passed by legislators that would otherwise be vague, protect consumers and workers, and are an essential part to modern life. But you also have people on the other end of the spectrum argue against administrative rules and regulations. They argue that these agencies, executive agencies, have created bloated bureaucracies, I'll get to that in a second, and require wasteful paperwork interfering with the efficient operation of the marketplace. So, bureaucracies. You may have had an encounter with a bureaucracy before. Government bureaucracies can be extremely frustrating. If, for example, if you've ever gone to the DMV, the Department of Motor Vehicles, some of you are over 16 years old and would have gotten your license from the DMV. You know that it is a very frustrating place to be. That you stand in long lines and you take a ticket, you wait your turn, and then you go on up to one desk and you hand them your paperwork, and oh, you signed the wrong form, and so they give you the right form and they give you another ticket, and then you go sit back down and you wait your turn, and then they call your number, you go to the next person, and they say, oh, you forgot this form, please fill this out and add your signature here, and then go to this desk over in this general area. And it's just a lot of jumping through hoops, a lot of paperwork. That's what a government bureaucracy has the reputation of being. So the last topic that we're going to talk about today has nothing to do with executive agencies. We're just going to pivot here and then talk about the last source of where laws come from. We talked about the Constitution of the United States being the supreme law of the land. We talked about legislators creating law. Executive agencies is what we focus this lecture on. And then lastly, we're going to talk about courts. Now, courts, this may be a no duh type moment, but courts conduct trials, and a person who loses a trial can ask a higher court to review and change the results of a trial. So this is what's known as an appeal. You can appeal a ruling to a higher court. Now, it should be noted, and I'm going to talk about this again in our very next unit, but you can't just appeal just because you lost. That of course you're upset you lost. Nobody likes to lose, but you have to argue that an error of law was made at the lower level, and that is why you are appealing to a higher authority, what's known as an appellate court or an appeals court. They're the same thing. So an appeals court issues a written statement that establishes precedent for future similar cases. So this idea of precedent, that's sometimes a hard term for students to wrap their head around. Precedent, let's describe it as this. So me, I have a younger brother. I have two younger brothers, Matt and Johnny, and when I was in high school, I used to share the car with Matt. I'm the older brother, though, so I may make a rule, if you will. I may set a precedent that I always get to use the car on the weekend. So I would say to Matt, hey, you can use the car during the week, we'll share the car, but I get to use the car on the weekends. I'm the older brother, I'm a higher court than you are, so therefore I establish the precedent, and all lower courts, Matt, has to abide by my precedent. But then Matt may go run into my mom and then say, Mom, Bobby just said that he gets to use the car every single weekend, but Bobby's been struggling in school. He got a D on his exam, and he skipped 2 classes. And my mom might say, you know what? Matt has a really good point, that Bobby should be more responsible in school. He's misbehaving, and so absolutely not. Bobby, oh, by the way, I'm Bobby. That's my first name. Bobby does not get to use the car this weekend. Matt gets to use the car this weekend. So I'm a higher court than my brother, so I can establish precedent over him, but Matt would appeal my ruling to a higher authority, my mother, and when she establishes a precedent, then I have to abide by that precedent, and Matt also must abide by that precedent because we are lower courts. And then I might say, you know what, that's not fair at all. And so I may call up her mother. I call up Graham, and I say, Grandma, can you believe what my mom is saying? She's saying I can't use the car this weekend because I ditched classes twice, but I didn't actually ditch classes. Both of the times I had to pass. I got a D on an exam because I had missed class because I was sick for a couple days, but my teacher already said I could reassess on that exam. And my grandma may say, you know what, Bobby, you bring up a really good point. You get to use the car this weekend. Well, my grandma would be the supreme court of my family. And so she establishes a precedent, and all lower courts in my family my mom, me, and Matt must all abide by that precedent. So that's how precedent works. Higher courts establish precedents or rules, and all lower courts in a jurisdiction must abide by that ruling. All right, that's all I got for you today. So hope you learned something, and I'll see you next time.